So I want to go back to chapter 26 of the book of Numbers, and specifically the part we did not read this morning, which is entirely lineage. It's 45 long verses of clan names, which if you read it, you quickly see is essentially a roll call of male descendants. In those 45 verses, there are 6 exceptions. Serach, one of the a daughter of Asher, one of Jacob's children, is named, which it's not entirely clear why. And then, of course, we get the 5 daughters of Slophad, who are also named as individuals, not just referred to as a group. They are Machla, Noah, Chagla, Milcah, and Tirzah. Again, none of those, with the exception of Noah, are particularly easy to say either, which is why I think they just get lumped in as the daughters of Slophad. And so even before we read about the events surrounding them in chapter 27, the listing of their names is something that kind of gets our attention. It stands out. And so maybe it's not entirely surprising when they approach Moses, looking to solidify their claim or their family's claim to their ancestral heritage. But it seems as if Moses is surprised. And apparently he does not know how to address the issue that these women bring before him. The Midrash builds this scene out further, hearkening the reader back to the system of judges established by Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, under his advice in the book of Exodus. The Midrash tells that the sisters started with their local chieftain of 10 who didn't know the answer at the lowest level. He bumped it up to the chief of 50, who bumped it up to the chief of 100, who bumped it all the way up to the chief of 1,000, the highest person under Moshe, who still didn't have an answer. So he finally sends it along to Moses, who in turn doesn't have an answer and bumps it up really the highest you can go and puts the issue before God. God, for God's part, makes quick work of this question. Chapter 27, verse 6 reads that the plea of Slophad's daughters is just, and furthermore, that this will always be the law. And the Midrash, again, brings in the line that I highlighted in Ashrei, Psalm 145, with regards to this decision, Tov Adonai lakol v'rachamav al kol ma'asav. God is good to all. God's mercy extends to all of God's works. Emphasizing the fact that, again, even though the Torah is on the whole a very patriarchal work, there is room for all to find ourselves in it. So it seems like we could call this chapter neat and good and case closed. Except I am left with some lingering questions, and maybe some of you are too. Why did they even have to ask in the first place? Why was this not the law to start with? Why didn't Moshe or any of the other judges down the line realize that this was just and make the obvious decision? Is this small step towards egalitarianism a credit to the Israelite system and its officials, or an indictment of just how unjust the laws were to start with? I want to be clear about the fact that the ancient rabbis were very big fans of the daughters of Slophad. They built up a tradition that valorized these women as pious, smart, and dedicated scholars. In fact, the exact words that the Talmud uses to describe them is that they were wise, they were exegetes, and they were righteous. According to a midrash quoted in the Eitz Chaim, quoted in Ar Chumash, the law that is decided out of this was always intended to be the law, to be part of the legacy of the laws of the Torah, but it was withheld from Sinai specifically so that it could be attributed to these 5 great women. And I think it's still understandable to feel some frustration here. I find myself bristling still at the fact that they even needed to ask, and that for the rabbis, even this small push for equality and representation needed to come from exceptional standout women. That it took a huge push for just the lowest level of recognition. It remains, I think, an important message, however. In Gandhi's words, to be the change you want to see in the world. Even with the most generous view you might want to take of the biblical God, you can imagine a God who is benevolent and just and kind. Humanity, especially those on the margins, still need to ask and to push for the inclusion that they seek. According to Dr. Miriam Frankel, this story is a valuable lesson for us all, teaching us that Jewish law has the flexibility to expand and to embrace women, giving us increasingly more rights and a fairer share of our common legacy. And I think what Frankel writes is an important reminder for us on this 4th of July weekend as well. We can be inclined to view the Declaration of Independence as its own canonized document. The words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal," have some of that gravitas of the best passages that come down from Sinai. And they desperately need our own midrashic interpretation, as all men in 1776 was actually a very small and exclusive slice of society. Right now, I hear a little bit of Jean's voice in my head saying, "Alex, all the text does is list these women's name. There's nothing in there about piety or righteousness, no indication that they were scholars." And I think that's a really fair point. These women may very well have been 5 ordinary sisters who were just citizens of the people who wanted to see a change in the society around them. It's only through the continued questioning and the push from people like Slofchad's daughters, in our modern day, the heroes of the civil rights movement, the women who fought for suffrage only about 100 years ago, ordinary people who can't find their place in societies where they're included, and they rise to extraordinary callings. And it's only through people like them that we can actually hope to realize the idealistic common legacies that Dr. Frankel writes about.